Hello, this is Claudia, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the May 13th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. intelligence shows Iran retains substantial missile capabilities. Secret new assessments say Iran has operational access to 30 of its 33 missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting that its military remains far stronger than President Trump has asserted. The Trump administration's public portrayal of a shattered Iranian military is sharply at odds with what U.S. intelligence agencies are telling policymakers behind closed doors, according to classified assessments from early this month that show Iran has regained access to most of its missile sites, launchers, and underground facilities. Most alarming to some senior officials is evidence that Iran has restored operational access to 30 of the 33 missile sites it maintains along the Strait of Hormuz, which could threaten American warships and oil tankers transiting the narrow waterway. People with knowledge of the assessments said they show, to varying degrees, depending on the level of damage incurred at the different sites, that the Iranians can use mobile launchers that are inside the sites to move missiles to other locations. In some cases, they can launch missiles directly from launch pads that are part of the facilities. Only 3 of the missile sites along the strait remain totally inaccessible, according to the assessments. Iran still fields about 70% of its mobile launchers across the country and has retained roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile, according to the assessments. That stockpile encompasses both ballistic missiles, which can target other nations in the region, and a smaller supply of cruise missiles, which can be used against shorter-range targets on land or at sea. Military intelligence agencies have also reported, based on information from multiple collection streams, including satellite imagery and other surveillance technologies, that Iran has regained access to roughly 90% of its underground missile storage and launch facilities nationwide, which are now assessed to be partially or fully operational, the people with knowledge of the assessment said. The findings undercut months of public assurances from President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who have told Americans that the Iranian military was decimated and no longer a threat. On March 9th, 10 days into the war, Mr. Trump told CBS News that Iran's missiles are down to a scatter and that the country had nothing left in a military sense. Mr. Hegseth declared at a Pentagon news conference on April 8th that Operation Epic Fury, the joint U.S.-Israel campaign launched on February 28th, had decimated Iran's military and rendered it combat ineffective for years to come. The intelligence describing Iran's remaining military capacity is dated less than a month after that news conference. Asked about the intelligence assessments, a White House spokeswoman, Olivia Wales, repeated Mr. Trump's previous assertions that Iran's military had been crushed. She said that Iran's government knows that its current reality is not sustainable and that anyone who thinks Iran has reconstituted its military is either delusional or a mouthpiece for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Ms. Wales pointed to a social media post from Mr. Trump on Tuesday declaring that it was virtual treason to suggest that Iran's military was doing well. Joel Valdez, the acting Pentagon press secretary, responded to questions about the intelligence by criticizing news coverage of the war. It is so disgraceful that the New York Times and others are acting as public relations agents for the Iranian regime in order to paint Operation Epic Fury as anything other than a historic accomplishment, he said in a statement. The new intelligence assessment suggests that Mr. Trump and his military advisors overestimated the damage that the U.S. military could inflict on Iranian missile sites and underestimated Iran's resilience and ability to bounce back. The New York Times reported last month that U.S. officials believed that Iran could regain as much as 70% of its pre-war missile arsenal. The Washington Post reported last week on U.S. intelligence showing that Iran retained about 75% of its mobile missile launchers and about 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile. The findings underscore the dilemma Mr. Trump would face if the fragile month-old ceasefire in the conflict collapses and full-scale fighting resumes. The U.S. military has already depleted its stocks of many critical munitions, including Tomahawk cruise missiles, Patriot interceptor missiles, and precision strike and ATACMS ground-based missiles, and yet the intelligence suggests that Iran retains considerable military capability, including around the vital Strait of Hormuz. The passageway carries roughly a fifth of the world's daily oil consumption, and the U.S. Navy now maintains a near-continuous presence transiting and patrolling it. The U.S. Military Central Command said in a social media post on Sunday that more than 20 American warships were enforcing the blockade against Iran. If Mr. Trump ordered commanders to launch more strikes to take out or diminish those Iranian capabilities, then the U.S. military would have to dig even deeper into stocks of critical munitions. Doing so would further undercut U.S. stockpiles at a time when the Pentagon and the major arms makers are already struggling to find the industrial capacity to replenish American reserves. Mr. Trump and his advisors have repeatedly denied that the U.S. munitions stocks have been drained to dangerously low levels. In private, Pentagon officials have offered similar assurances to anxious European allies. Those allies have purchased billions of dollars of munitions from the United States on behalf of Ukraine, and they are concerned that those munitions will not be delivered because the U.S. military will need them to replenish its own stocks, a worry that would intensify if the president orders a return to hostilities with Iran. In testimony on Tuesday to a House Appropriations Subcommittee, General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, "We have sufficient munitions for what we're tasked to do right now." The joint assault on Iran by the United States and Israel inflicted considerable damage on Iran's defenses and damaged or destroyed many strategic sites around the country. Many of Iran's senior leaders have been killed, and its economy is staggering under the pressures of the war, leaving questions about how long it can sustain its hard line on a negotiated end to the conflict and the halt on nearly all oil tanker traffic and other shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran's apparent ability to retain substantial military capacity has exacerbated concerns among U.S. allies about the wisdom of the war and generated criticism among Mr. Trump's anti-interventionist supporters who opposed getting into the conflict in the first place. The intelligence assessments on Iran's capabilities point to the consequences of a tactical choice made by U.S. military commanders. When American forces struck Iran's hardened missile facilities, the Pentagon, faced with limited stocks of bunker-busting munitions, opted to try to seal off many of the entrances rather than trying to destroy the entire sites with all of the missiles inside, officials said, with mixed results. Some bunker busters were dropped on Iran's underground facilities, but officials said military planners faced a difficult choice and needed to be cautious in using them because they needed to preserve a certain number of U.S. operational plans for potential wars in Asia with North Korea and China. As the New York Times previously reported, the United States expended roughly 1,100 long-range stealth cruise missiles in the war, close to the total supply that remains in the American stockpile. The military also fired more than 1,000 Tomahawk missiles, roughly 10 times the number the Pentagon procures in a year, and it used more than 1,300 Patriot interceptor missiles during the war, which accounts for more than 2 years of production at 2025 rates. Replenishing those stockpiles will take years, not months. Lockheed Martin currently produces around 650 Patriot interceptors a year. The company has announced plans to ramp up production of the crucial air defense weapon to 2,000 a year, but doing so will not be easy, and the industry's ability to produce rocket motors cannot be scaled up as quickly as Mr. Trump has demanded, officials said. Sean Parnell, the chief Pentagon spokesman, said the military has everything it needs to carry out its mission. We have executed multiple successful operations across combatant commands while ensuring the U.S. military possesses a deep arsenal of capabilities to protect our people and our interests, he said in a statement to the Times. The lecturer and philosopher King Xi Jinping behind closed doors. Encounters with other world leaders reveal a side of China's leader that the public rarely sees and other clues to how he will approach President Trump in Beijing. More than halfway through his third term as China's leader, Xi Jinping still remains one of the most opaque figures in global politics. His views on rivals and partners inferred from the tightly controlled choreography of his public appearances. But in private meetings with foreign leaders, captured in the accounts of those who were there, along with the occasional hot mic, a sharper portrait emerges. It is of a leader who has no close rivals for power in China, who does not hesitate to lecture less powerful leaders, and who carries himself as a philosopher king in the mold of ancient Chinese rulers. And by at least one account, Mr. Xi formed his verdict of President Trump nearly a decade ago, a judgment likely to have shaped his approach to global affairs ever since, including how he handles Mr. Trump this week in Beijing. It was late 2016, and Mr. Trump had just stunned the world weeks earlier by winning the U.S. presidential election. Mr. Xi was meeting President Obama for the final time at a summit in Lima, Peru, and he had questions. Mr. Xi seemed baffled as to how American voters could choose someone so unconventional, according to Ben Rhodes, a deputy national security advisor in the Obama administration who attended the meeting. Mr. Obama tried to explain to Mr. Xi that Mr. Trump's rise was a sign of economic frustration in the United States, in part over loss of manufacturing jobs to China and the theft of intellectual property. Mr. Xi, in Mr. Rhodes' telling, was displeased with the explanation. He put down his pen, folded his arms, and said, "If an immature leader throws the world into chaos, then the world will know who to blame." Now, as he heads into a summit with Mr. Trump in Beijing, Mr. Xi will want to present China as a stable and strong global power, analysts say, while being conciliatory enough to preserve a fragile trade truce with Mr. Trump. "I expect that Xi will show Trump respect but not flatter him," said Susan Shirk, the author of Overreach, How China Derailed Its Peaceful Rise. The contrast with Trump's unilateral and disruptive actions will be implicit, not explicit, she added. The lecturer, How Xi Treats Middle Powers. If Mr. Xi treats Washington with cautious restraint, he is less likely to hold back with middle powers like Canada and Britain. In 2022, Mr. Xi confronted then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada at the end of a Group of 20 summit in Indonesia and accused him of leaking details of the previous day's talks between them to the media. The tense exchange between the two men, who were standing close to each other and speaking through translators, was captured by a news cameraman. "That was not appropriate," Mr. Xi said, smiling tightly, "and that's not how the conversation was conducted," he continued, shaking his head. He said sincerity and respect were needed for the talks to be productive, and in an implicit warning added, "Otherwise the outcome will be hard to say." Mr. Trudeau tried to argue that he had done nothing wrong by Canadian standards and offered to agree to disagree. Mr. Xi then cut him off and said, "Let's create the conditions first," before shaking Mr. Trudeau's hand and walking away. With Canada's current leader, Prime Minister Mark Carney, Mr. Xi attempted to set the rules of how they should engage, saying he did not want to be criticized in public. Mr. Carney said Mr. Xi told him in a recent meeting in South Korea, their first since the Canadian leader took office, to raise any issues with him in private. He chose to spend the first 10-plus minutes discussing how he wanted the personal interaction to be, Mr. Carney said at a Lowy Institute event in Sydney in March. Mr. Carney summarized Mr. Xi's message as, "No surprises. If you really care about something, be clear," he said. He added, he didn't say it this way, but I interpret it. Don't lecture me in public. Bring issues to me directly." While Mr. Xi may not want to be lectured, he has no problem venting to others. When Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain met with Mr. Xi in Beijing in January, the British leader brought up Chinese-Japanese relations, which are at their lowest point in years. Mr. Xi, who had been calm throughout the meeting, grew agitated and told Mr. Starmer that the tensions were entirely Japan's fault, according to two people familiar with the interaction who spoke on the condition of anonymity. Beijing has waged a pressure campaign against Tokyo after Prime Minister Sanae Tokachi of Japan told her parliament that Japan could respond militarily if China attacked Taiwan. The philosopher How He Engages the Powerful. The Chinese Communist Party seeks legitimacy by casting itself as custodian of China's thousands-year-old civilization. Mr. Xi reinforces that tradition by carrying himself like one of China's ancient philosopher kings, whose duties included applying Confucian values to governance and statecraft. In Chinese political culture, the top leader is not supposed to care about day-to-day mundane things, said Zoe Louis, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. They are the Son of Heaven and are supposed to be engaged in philosophical matters. That not only amplifies a leader's importance, but also emphasizes the greatness of Chinese culture to Western leaders hoping to change Beijing's behavior. That was quickly apparent to President Obama during a state visit to Beijing in 2014. After a long private dinner with Mr. Xi in the walled leadership compound known as Zhanghe, Mr. Obama's aides were expecting to hear that the two leaders had spoken about contentious issues like the South China Sea. In fact, they had this kind of lengthy discussion about whether there is compatibility between individualist societies and collectivist Confucian societies, said Mr. Rhodes, the former Obama advisor. That same elevated register shapes how Mr. Xi talks about political systems. President Biden has recounted being told by Mr. Xi that democracies cannot be sustained in the 21st century because they require national consensus. It's hard to get consensus, therefore they can't keep up with autocracy. One man rule, Mr. Biden said he was told. Mr. Xi's sense of imperial grandeur was caught twice on a hot mic with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. In 2023, as he was bidding farewell to the Russian leader in Moscow, Mr. Xi could be heard saying, "Right now there are changes, the likes of which we haven't seen for 100 years, and we are the ones driving these changes together." 2 years later, at a military parade in Beijing, Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin were heard on camera discussing immortality and advances in biotechnology. It could be that in this century humans might be able to live to 150 years old, Mr. Xi is heard saying. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Day 1 in quarantine, tested for hantavirus, treated to Starbucks. Jake Rosmarin, a travel influencer from Boston, is one of 15 passengers from the virus-stricken cruise ship who are being monitored at the National Quarantine Unit in Nebraska. Jake Rosmarin boarded a cruise ship in Argentina on April 1st, expecting a few weeks of swimming, hiking, and birding on a trip to Cabo Verde. Instead, he found himself at the center of a global health crisis as his ship became ground zero for a deadly hantavirus breakout. Now he'll spend another 6 weeks in a 300-square-foot airtight quarantine room at the medical center in Omaha. Doctors there will monitor him and 15 other American passengers for signs of the rare virus carried by rodents for which there is no readily available vaccine. "I've never been so excited to go to Nebraska," Mr. Rosmarin, age 29, texted his fiancée when the group was bound for the specialized quarantine center. A travel influencer from Boston, Mr. Rosmarin has taken several trips with the cruise ship's parent company, Oceanwide Expeditions, posting videos and social media updates about the experiences in exchange for free travel. He shared news from the ship, the MV Hondius, after he and his fellow passengers were exposed to the rare Andes strain of the hantavirus, which, unlike other strains, can be transmitted by close contact with infected people. "It's been a surreal, weird experience," he said on Tuesday, describing the last few days as he and the other passengers were flown from the Canary Islands to Omaha, as something that felt like straight out of a movie. When the first passenger died on April 11th, Mr. Rosmarin said he thought it was a sad but isolated incident. Then passengers learned that a second person had died in a hospital on April 26th after disembarking. Cruise officials informed them that a third passenger had died on the ship on May 2nd. "Up until that point, all of these things were kind of just weird," he said. "There were no worry or concern until those very last few moments." It was only the next day, on May 3rd, that Mr. Rosmarin and the bulk of his fellow passengers were told about the hantavirus outbreak. Then he learned that the health authorities in Cape Verde were refusing to let them disembark. Mr. Rosmarin said he began texting and calling family members and searching Google for anything he could learn about the disease. "It was a scary time," he said. "I confined myself essentially to my cabin." For the next week, Mr. Rosmarin, he said, stayed in that small room, leaving only for 15 minutes or so each day to grab fresh air, food, and water. He spent the rest of the time communicating with his family and fiancée in Boston and posting updates on Instagram. "There was a while that I didn't know when I was getting off that ship," he said. The ship anchored off the Canary Islands on Sunday, allowing passengers to disembark. Within an hour, he and 17 other Americans had been shuttled onto a U.S. government flight. They wore K995 masks and could bring only a small portion of their belongings, which were disinfected before they boarded the plane. Mr. Rosmarin carried a small backpack with his camera, laptop, passport, some clean clothes, and a bag of toiletries. The rest of his belongings, 2 suitcases and a duffel bag full of souvenirs, are still on the ship. It's unclear if or when he will get them back. After landing in Omaha, Mr. Rosmarin and 14 other passengers were taken to the National Quarantine Unit, the only federally funded facility in the country designed to monitor those who have been exposed to infectious diseases. One other person, the only American who had tested positive for the hantavirus, was sent to a special biocontainment unit across the street, and 2 others, including one who was showing symptoms of the disease, were sent to another biocontainment unit at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. That symptomatic person tested negative for the hantavirus on Monday evening, federal health officials said on Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Rosmarin said he had decided to spend his full 42-day quarantine period in the Nebraska facility rather than going home to Boston and isolating there. "If anything were to happen, I can't foresee there being anywhere else to have better medical care for this specific illness than being here," he said. As of Tuesday afternoon, Mr. Rosmarin was not feeling any symptoms. He said he was constantly checking his temperature with a thermometer and preparing to take his first test for the hantavirus. On a video call, he showcased the features of the room where he will be living for the next 6 weeks, panning his camera across a full-size bed, a desk, a television, an exercise bike, a window, and a large bathroom and closet. He has Wi-Fi, access to streaming services, and a long list of food that he can order for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The nurses brought him Starbucks on Tuesday. He said he plans to spend the 6 weeks writing in his journal, planning for his upcoming wedding, and keeping in touch with friends and family, and of course, making more social media content. A Texas city bet big on industry. Now it's running out of water. Rising demand, municipal dysfunction, and drought have pushed Corpus Christi to the edge of a water emergency, offering a cautionary tale for the rest of the country. The mayor of Corpus Christi called an emergency meeting last month to deliver a dire warning. The city, among the largest in Texas, was running out of water. City leaders had to make a plan, and fast. Every day of delay increases uncertainty, the mayor, Paulette Guajardo, told the city council. Officials have warned that demand for water could outstrip supply within months. Corpus Christi, a coastal city of more than 300,000 and a home to large industrial port, is not alone in grappling with water shortages. Half the nation is dealing with a persistent drought, according to federal data, at the same time as industrial water demand has risen because of the growing needs from power plants and data centers. But Corpus Christi's struggle to respond could serve as a warning to cities around Texas and across the country, officials said. "This is actually the canary in the coal mine," said Charles Perry, a Republican who chairs a committee on water in the Texas Senate. Faced with the looming water crisis, Governor Greg Abbott has threatened a state takeover, saying he may be forced to run that city. President Trump, during a visit last month, promised the city federal support for water projects. Corpus Christi's water problem has been building for several years. Its port and industrial corridor have expanded with the encouragement of the state and local government. New water sources have not kept pace. Then came a major ongoing drought, now in its 5th year. Major industrial companies, which use half the city's water each day, have recently taken some steps to reduce consumption, like using more internally recycled water and cutting back on fleet vehicle washes, industry representatives said, but city officials said the companies have not made drastic cuts. Bob Paulson, executive director of the Coastal Bend Industry Association, which represents companies with local footprints like Citgo and Valero Energy, said simply shutting down industry is not a viable option. "There are hundreds of billions of dollars of investment at stake," he said in an interview, "and the future of an entire region. Failure to address the crisis would ripple far beyond Corpus Christi. The city supplies water to about 500,000 customers in 7 countries, and the industrial companies that produce products. The city supplies water The city supplies water to about 500,000 customers in 7 counties and the industrial companies that produce products like jet fuel, plastics, and steel. But the city council, which is tasked with fixing the problem, has been racked by infighting and high turnover. There is an effort to remove the mayor from office, and even mundane policy discussions devolve into sniping. At the emergency meeting last month, some council members questioned the mayor's focus on a desalination project that they said would not solve the city's immediate water problems. It's clearly dysfunctional, Peter Zanoni, the city manager, said in an interview. Without a quick solution, there has been an all-out scramble for water in recent months. Residents have been asked to conserve as the city drills new wells. Even the school district is looking at drilling. All of the projects could cost around $1 billion, which would increase the city's debt by 50%. Officials have also discussed building multiple desalination plants similar to those used in the Middle East to turn seawater into drinkable water. Many residents have prayed for rain or, in some cases, even a hurricane. A city program to sell plastic barrels so residents can catch the rain at home proved so popular that officials sold out their supply last month. More are on the way. God willing, the rain will come, a city councilwoman, Sylvia Campos, said after the emergency meeting. Almost everyone agrees on how Corpus Christi got there. The city relies on surface water to provide much of its supply, but after years without significant rain, the lakes have dwindled. 2 nearby reservoirs recently dipped below 10% capacity, and a third briefly dropped below 50% last month. City officials said a level 1 water emergency may be declared in September, which means there are just 6 months until demand exceeds supply. That could trigger mandatory water cutbacks of as much as 25% for some customers. Corpus Christi has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on infrastructure projects over the last 5 years, said Mr. Zanoni, the city manager, but the city's water plan, he said, was not designed to handle the current drought, which has lasted nearly 5 years. By last summer, he said, he stopped hoping a storm would save them and realized this is going to be a serious event. City leaders have discussed desalination as a possible long-term solution. Water experts have called it a drought-proof option. City officials, however, estimate that desalination would not provide drinkable water until late 2029. The City Council remains divided on the issue. It voted to shelve a desalination project last year after the cost ballooned over $1 billion. The project was renewed at a lower price and under a new firm. The council now wants to ensure the project will be environmentally safe before moving forward. Some residents and council members oppose it altogether because it would be built in Hillcrest, a historically black neighborhood near the port. They put industry as a priority and not the citizens, said Mona Little, age 71, who grew up in Hillcrest. She worried a desalination plant would further harm her neighborhood, which is already flanked by refineries and industrial storage facilities and has dwindled to about 80 households. The City Council is scheduled to consider the plant's next steps in June. At the same time, the Council is looking into misconduct allegations against Mayor Guajardo related to a hotel development project. Carolyn Vaughn, a conservative councilwoman, blamed Ms. Guajardo for the bickering on the council, adding that the high turnover has hurt the council's ability to conduct long-term planning. Council members serve 2-year terms. We're doing the best that we can, she said. Ms. Guajardo has denied any wrongdoing. She said the removal effort is about water and my refusal to accept further delays on seawater desalination. The city requested $500 million in federal funding for desalination through its congressman earlier this year, Mr. Zanoni said, including for the Hillcrest plant supported by the mayor. Mr. Trump addressed the city's needs during his recent visit, vowing in a television interview to help. It's one of the most vibrant places in the country, Mr. Trump said of Corpus Christi. We're not going to say it's vibrant, but we're not going to give you water. A White House spokeswoman said federal officials have offered to meet with lawmakers and industry leaders to discuss the matter further. The state has offered low-interest loans for the desalination plant. The governor has also tried clearing away some hurdles, including fast-tracking permits from state environmental regulators to help the city accomplish its short-term fixes, like tapping into underground water. Over the past year, the city has drilled 15 wells on land it bought in rural parts of Nueces County, where the city is located. It has also gone further afield, planning a massive new groundwater project with 24 wells in neighboring San Patricio County. The city has faced resistance over these efforts. They're pushing their emergency off on us, said Kelly Harlan, who is part of a group of Nueces County residents trying to create a new local government entity to manage groundwater drilling in the area. He said water levels in rural wells have already dropped since the city began drilling nearby. The nearby city of Sinton, population 5,500, has taken Corpus Christi to court over its attempts to tap into their underground water. It's kind of like the bully in the neighborhood, said John Hobson, the city manager in Sinton. Mr. Zanoni of Corpus Christi said he hoped its underground water projects would prevent a serious water emergency in the coming months. If everything goes our way, we should be okay, he said, sitting in a city hall office. We should make it. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. With a friend in Trump, the tobacco industry secures a lucrative win. In a dispute over vapes, the president sided with tobacco companies that filled his group's coffers over his own FDA commissioner who resigned in protest. Over lunch at his golf club in Jupiter, Florida on the first Saturday of May, President Trump got an earful from a group of tobacco executives and lobbyists unhappy with the way the Food and Drug Administration was regulating their industry. Eventually, Mr. Trump had heard enough. He interrupted the conversation to call Dr. Marty Makary, the FDA commissioner. No answer. Furious, the president then dialed Dr. Makary's boss, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and another top health official, Dr. Mehmet Oz, the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. He complained to them about the FDA's regulation of e-cigarettes, according to 3 people briefed on the meeting who were not authorized to discuss it. The message was received. Less than 1 week later, the executives got what they wanted. On Friday, the FDA issued new guidance that could pave the way for major tobacco companies to begin selling flavored vapes and to snare a chunk of its $6 billion e-cigarette market away from illegal Chinese competitors. The new policy bypassed the FDA's regular rule-making process. In the intervening week, Dr. Makary continued to argue against approving flavored vapes as support from Mr. Kennedy and others collapsed around him. Health and Human Services Department staff began to draft the new plan, according to 2 people familiar with the events. On Tuesday, Dr. Makary resigned, telling associates he could not in good conscience remain the head of an agency that backed such a policy. Though there is no definitive evidence linking the new guidance to donations or lobbying, the episode represented a clear pivot in the federal government's longtime approach to the tobacco industry. Since the 1990s, when states extracted vast payments and other concessions from the major cigarette companies in a nationwide legal settlement, big tobacco has been in retreat. Cigarette sales have plummeted and regulations have mounted as consumers and administrations from both parties embrace public health consensus about the dangers of smoking and nicotine addiction. Mr. Trump's first administration initially continued the trend, proposing further restrictions on cigarettes and moving to outlaw flavored vapes over concerns that their rising popularity threatened the health of a generation of adolescents. But since then, Mr. Trump has enthusiastically welcomed the financial support of the tobacco industry and has courted e-cigarette users as a political constituency. The new vaping guidance highlights Mr. Trump's willingness to use his executive authority to prioritize the causes of major corporate donors over public health concerns, taxpayer interests, and the judgment of experts, sometimes including those in his own administration. The president has developed a close relationship with tobacco companies, including Altria and Reynolds American, which have donated millions of dollars to his political groups and projects, including his proposed White House ballroom. Their executives attended the lunch at the President's Golf Club. The Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the FDA, referred requests for comment to the White House. Kush Desai, a White House spokesman, said in a statement that Mr. Trump has pushed to expand access to vapes to help Americans trying to quit smoking. The only guiding factor behind the Trump administration's health policy making is gold standard science, Mr. Desai said. Reynolds American and Altria did not respond to questions about their lobbying or the conversation at the lunch. It was attended by Jeff Raborn, a top executive at Reynolds, and Phil Park and Todd Walker of Altria, according to the people familiar with the meeting. Also attending were Brian Ballard and Rich Hasselwood, lobbyists for the firm Ballard Partners, which represents Reynolds and helped marshal a sophisticated and expensive influence campaign that culminated in the new vaping guidance. Mr. Ballard is a top fundraiser for Mr. Trump. Mr. Hasselwood has been an in-house lobbyist at Reynolds before joining Ballard Partners this year. A spokesman for Ballard Partners declined to comment. While public health experts consider e-cigarettes a less harmful alternative to tobacco-burning cigarettes, the new guidance circumvents a scientific review process the FDA had previously defended up to the Supreme Court. The disregarded procedures were meant to ensure approval of only those products shown in studies to help cigarette smokers transition to vapes without attracting a new generation of nicotine users. The guidance also could allow higher nicotine levels in nicotine pouches. It includes a pledge to prioritize efforts to stop the import of illegal foreign vapes, an idea that has bipartisan support in Congress. Taken together, the policy changes could help companies like Altria and Reynolds gain market share considered central to the survival of the industry. The market for vapes and nicotine pouches like Zyn is about 30 million people in the United States, on par with the number of cigarette smokers. While the nicotine pouch market is rapidly growing, cigarettes still account for about $50.8 billion, or nearly 70% of the annual tobacco sales in the United States, according to a Goldman Sachs research report. Vape sales have lagged amid competition from illicit products. In recent years, the FDA has moved glacially to approve e-cigarettes, authorizing only those in tobacco or menthol flavors, including some sold by Reynolds and Altria. Unapproved Chinese vapes have poured in the United States, feeding a thriving illicit market with flavors like peach slush and watermelon ice. Last year, industry executives have said illicit fruit-flavored vapes made up 60% of the e-cigarette market. When Mr. Trump mounted his bid to return to the White House, some in the tobacco industry went all in, hoping he would loosen regulations on vapes and abandon plans by the Biden administration to ban menthol cigarettes and crack down on other cigarette sales. Mr. Trump in some ways makes for an unlikely savior for the tobacco industry. He has never smoked, but he pledged during his 2024 campaign to save vaping again. Through a subsidiary, Reynolds, which is the biggest seller of menthol cigarettes, donated $10 million to a super PAC backing Mr. Trump's campaign, according to a campaign finance filings. There is no public record of the subsidiary donating to groups supporting Mr. Biden or the campaign of former Vice President Kamala Harris. Mr. Ballard, whose firm has been paid more than $4.4 million by Reynolds since the beginning of 2017, arranged for Mr. Trump to have dinner during the campaign with Reynolds executives in New York, according to a person familiar with the interactions. The executives urged Mr. Trump to oppose the menthol cigarette ban and express concern about Chinese vapes. Reynolds executives, including Mr. Raborn and Mr. Hasselwood, were such a presence around the campaign that Mr. Trump took to calling them "my tobacco guys," according to the person familiar with the interactions and a book co-authored by a New York Times reporter and published last year. When Mr. Trump won, the rest of the industry jockeyed to show support. Altria donated $1 million to his inaugural committee. The Vapor Technology Association donated $1.25 million, and a subsidiary of the Philip Morris donated $500,000. On Mr. Trump's second full day in office, his administration withdrew the proposed ban on menthol cigarettes, an initiative the Biden administration had already mostly abandoned. Mr. Trump's team also set aside a Biden-era proposal to sharply restrict nicotine in cigarettes, an effort meant to speed the transition away from a product known to be deadly. In applauding the withdrawal of the menthol ban, Billy Gifford, the chief executive of Altria, told investors on an April 2025 earnings call that we're hopeful that the activity and momentum continues. The courtship intensified. Reynolds pitched in another $3 million to a different Trump-backed super PAC, while Altria and Juul each donated $1 million, and Reynolds and Altria each donated to the effort to raise private funds to build a new White House ballroom. Mr. Reborn of Reynolds and Mr. Walker of Altria were invited to a dinner at the White House in October for donors who gave $2.5 million or more, as was Mr. Ballard. Tato Morocco, the chief executive of British American Tobacco, which owns Reynolds American, predicted to investors earlier this year that the Trump administration would clamp down on illegal vapes, saying it's very encouraging the signs that the new administration is giving to address that. The company's lobbying strategy also has reached into the states, where they are pushed for so-called registry laws, of which there are now more than a dozen, including in Florida, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Many of those laws restrict e-cigarette sales to only vapes on a list from the FDA. The guidance released last week said it would create such a list. Britain has had 5 leaders in a decade. Is it about to get another? The promise of Keir Starmer's Labour Party in 2024 was renewed stability, but that now appears to be under threat. When Prime Minister Keir Starmer led the Labour Party to victory in Britain's last general election in 2024, he campaigned on a platform of stability, selling his party as the antidote to years of chaos under a succession of Conservative prime ministers. Now Labour's promise of steady governance seems under threat as Mr. Starmer battles calls for his resignation from his own party after it suffered heavy losses in local elections last week. Critics of Mr. Starmer argue that his deep unpopularity makes a new leader necessary if Labour is to stand a chance in the next general election, which must be held by 2029. But some of his allies have pointed to the cumulative damage done to the country by the cycling through of prime ministers under the Conservatives and warned Labour to be cautious about following suit. Britain appears to have been addicted to political drama in relation to its prime ministers, said Tony Travers, a professor of politics at the London School of Economics. He argued that the fall in Britain's economic growth rate after the 2008 financial crisis, compounded by the impacts of Brexit, have made government difficult to the point of impossibility. Parliamentary systems compared to presidential ones make changing leaders easy, said Mr. Travers, but changing leadership doesn't change the fundamental challenges facing Britain. They include fragile public services that are still struggling after years of underinvestment and the inflationary impact of the Iran war. Many lawmakers in the Labour Party are wary of potentially starting their own era of rapid-fire leadership changes. 5 Conservative Party leaders led Britain from 2016 to 2024. Here's how they came to 10 Downing Street and left it. David Cameron, brought low by Brexit. Dave Cameron served as Prime Minister from 2010 to 2016, during which time he called for the Brexit referendum. He hoped to win a mandate from voters for Britain to stay in the European Union and to end division in the Conservative Party over the issue. That backfired disastrously when a slim majority of Britons voted to leave. The day after the vote, Mr. Cameron stood in front of 10 Downing Street and announced his resignation, saying that the country deserved a leader committed to carrying out the will of the people. He initially said that he would stay in the post for 3 months to ensure stability, but after Theresa May won the Conservative Party leadership contest, she was appointed Prime Minister on July 13, 2016. Theresa May also felled by Brexit. Ms. May, formerly Home Secretary in Mr. Cameron's government, was the country's second female prime minister after Margaret Thatcher. She immediately took up a difficult task of negotiating Britain's exit from the European Union. Her time in office was dominated by Brexit. She favored a somewhat softer exit from the European Union, which angered hardline Eurosceptics in the party, and she failed to secure a deal that her party would support. Brexit was ultimately her undoing, too. Facing a cabinet rebellion in May 2019, she announced plans to resign. Boris Johnson forced to resign over Partygate. Boris Johnson, the wild-haired and bombastic former London mayor, was elected as the next party leader and took up the post in July 2019. He had campaigned for Britain to leave the European Union and was a prominent critic of Ms. May's approach to Brexit. He won power by promising to take back control of Britain's borders. Mr. Johnson went on to lead the party to a large election victory in 2019. A few months later, the country was plunged into the COVID-19 pandemic and a series of damaging scandals, including gatherings at Downing Street during a national lockdown, which became known as Partygate, forced him to resign in July 2022. Liz Truss undone by unfunded tax cuts. There was no real consensus on who would replace Mr. Johnson, but Liz Truss was eventually edged out Rishi Sunak in a leadership contest and became Prime Minister in September 2022. Ms. Truss, who was Foreign Secretary under Mr. Johnson, held the premiership for just 6 weeks, famously outlasted by a head of lettuce, becoming Britain's shortest-serving Prime Minister. During her short time in office, a time that included the death of Queen Elizabeth II, she introduced an unfunded tax cut plan that plunged the country's financial markets into chaos. She tried to backtrack, but it wasn't enough to undo the lasting political and economic damage. Rishi Sunak voted out in a general election. Mr. Sunak, a former chancellor of the Exchequer, swiftly took up the helm, unopposed in the party's leadership contest after Ms. Truss' downfall. In October 2022, he became the first British Prime Minister of the Indian heritage. The dramas of his immediate predecessors haunted his tenure, and when he called the general election in 2024, his party suffered stunning losses. He spoke to the country in front of Downing Street, saying, "I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters." You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Mel Brooks donates his archives to the National Comedy Center. The comedian is contributing some 20,000 documents and photos covering his career, including his time in the Army and the lyrics for Springtime for Hitler. As the 2,000-year-old man prepares to turn 100, he's looking to history. Mel Brooks, who will hit the century mark in June, and whose titanic career includes playing an ancient man with a thick Jewish accent, answering questions about subjects like the invention of fire, credit goes to a guy named Murray, is donating his personal archives to the National Comedy Center in Jamestown, New York. Chronicling one of the pillars of modern comedy, this archive covers nearly 15,000 documents and 5,000 photos that shed light on a lifetime of making jokes. It includes the development of scripts he helped create for the pioneering sketch series Your Show of Shows, one of the television's first comedy hits, and early scripts for Spaceballs back when it was called Planet Moron. The archive also features storyboards and other material from every movie he has directed, including his blockbuster parodies of Broadway, The Producers, westerns Blazing Saddles, and horror Young Frankenstein. Among the many personal photos is a shot of Brooks with Gene Wilder, who starred in all 3 of those films. "It's obviously Gene Wilder. I don't know why he had to add that W," Brooks wrote in an email. "I'm honored that my contributions will be preserved for future generations at the National Comedy Center, especially because it's a place that was meaningful to my best friend, Carl Reiner, who believed in the importance of preserving comedy's history," Brooks said in a statement. Reiner, who was Brooks' partner on the five 2,000-Year-Old Man albums, died in 2020, and his archives were donated to the National Comedy Center this year. "I know he'd be happy that our work will be around for the next 2,000 years, or maybe even more," Brooks added. Conversations about the donation began 5 years ago, and while many major comedians, including Joan Rivers and George Carlin, have donated their files to the organization, Brooks' contributions are particularly important, said Journey Gunderson, the executive director of the center. "It's as big as it gets," she said, especially considering the duration of Mel's career and the way he so fearlessly satirizes the darkest moments of humanity in the post-World War II era. No one in comedy made fun of the Nazis more frequently than Brooks. Martin Short, playing the moronic celebrity interviewer Jiminy Glick, once asked him, "What's your big beef with the Nazis?" Brooks quipped, "I think they were rude." Long before he dressed up as Hitler and skated around an ice rink in History of the World Part 1, Brooks fought Germany as a member of the U.S. Army in World War II. Some of the earliest material in the archive comes from this era, including his comedy notebook and a photo of him in uniform that he believes he was sending home to his mother. For students of comedy, one of the most valuable documents on the collection is a handwritten draft of the lyrics for Springtime for Hitler, the song from the intentionally awful musical at the center of the plot of the landmark comedy The Producers, made first a movie in 1968 and then turned into a Broadway musical in 2001. The jokes in this song are now some of the best known in comedy. Don't be stupid, be a smarty, come and join the Nazi party. But this draft reveals a lyric that is unfamiliar. Maybe other men have vigor and dash, but other men don't have that mustache. In an email, Brooks explained, I'm very proud of the mustache line, but in the end, it didn't make it in. Hacky sack mounts a comeback with Gen Z. Teenagers are booting the game out of the 1990s. It's kind of bringing everybody together. One said, a couple of weeks ago, a gaggle of freshmen at McCallum High School in Austin, Texas, pulled out a pouch the size of a clementine and began batting it back and forth between their feet. It took a minute for me to realize, wait, this is a hacky sack, said Sandra Primo, age 56, a teacher at McCallum. I haven't seen this in a while. Now she sees it constantly. Students circle up with a hacky sack during lunchtime or get in a few kicks in the hallways after class. Primo has been having flashbacks to the Fish and Grateful Dead shows of her youth. One of the boys was like, where can I get one, she recalled. I said 1992. Once the domain of mellow Gen Xers in the 80s and 90s, the hacky sack is experiencing a renaissance at the hands, the feet of Gen Z. High school students around the country are freshly enthusiastic about the toys, crocheted bean bags that once hung in the air like the scent of marijuana. Parents and teachers mostly seem glad to watch young people be entranced by something other than their phones. This time around, hacky sack mania appears to have taken off in the Northeast before spreading nationally with the help of social media. The sacks are technically called foot bags. Hacky sack is a brand name, but retailers of all kinds of thwackable bags are now racing to keep up with demand. Young customers at Play It Again Sports in Concord, California have been clearing the shelves of suede-paneled Sandmasters, $10, and multicolored Buddha bags, $6 for at least a month, said Billy Ball, age 46, a sales associate. I'm serious. We get 15 calls a day about hacky sacks, he said. Munjo, a gift shop in Raleigh, North Carolina, typically sells 2 to 3 hacky sacks a week, said Jamie Aguirre, 42, an owner of the store. Last week he sold more than 30. We know there's people that do it, but we thought it was all of us old folks, he said. Teenagers tend to describe the phenomenon as a hacky sack epidemic, but even they have little trouble explaining what is going on. It's literally come out of nowhere, said Joey Fink, a 17-year-old senior at Wolcott High School in Wolcott, Connecticut. Earlier this month, he and some friends were inspired by videos on TikTok to start kicking around a green hacky sack with a smiley face on it during their downtime before baseball practice. These days, the boys' firm rallies complex enough to please Rube Goldberg and then share them to Instagram and TikTok accounts they created to document their sacking exploits. The school's vice principal recently joined one of their circles for a few kicks. He was pretty good, Fink said. It's kind of bringing everybody together. Online, hacky sack has become an elaborate inside joke with hundreds of accounts cheekily treating the game as a varsity sport. They post interscholastic rankings and announce when students commit to fictional hacky sack programs at Division I colleges. We have a varsity and a JV team which we made rosters for, said Wiley Walters, age 18, a senior at the Potomac School in McLean, Virginia. Her friend, Nathalia Kellett, age 18, uploads the group's best tricks to the Potomac Women's Sack account she runs on Instagram. Beyond the jokes, Kellett said she enjoyed the communal nature of the game and how approachable it was for new players. At first, I couldn't even get contact, she said. Now she is mastering stalls, which include balancing a hacky sack on one's toe or sternum. Hacky sack is typically traced back to 1972, when Mike Marshall kicked around a handmade beanbag in an Oregon basement with his friend Joe Stahlberger. It eventually grew into a sport with organized tournaments and a periodical called Footbag World. While the game has maintained a core group of fans, it has been some time since it achieved anything approaching mass popularity. We have never seen a moment like this, said Grayson Herdman, a co-owner of World Footbag, which manufactures footbags and operates a museum about the history of the sport. He thinks that the game's appeal to Gen Z has to do with its emphasis on camaraderie. It's a shared experience, he said. I'm not trying to beat you in a game. We're playing together. The old guard seemed happy to welcome newcomers. Derek Fogel, age 62, a hacky sack legend in Columbia, Missouri, and member of the Footbag Hall of Fame, said he had been intrigued by the unusual serve setups he had seen among younger players. It would be really easy for me to look at this and say, hey, that's not the way you play hacky sack, he said. But he said he would rather let a new generation make the game their own. A group of teenage hacky sackers at Trinity Pauling School in the Hudson Valley recently sent Fogel an Instagram direct message asking him to sign on as their coach. He accepted, and last week he mailed them a box of his old hacky sacks. They shooting at us, Rihanna and ASAP Rocky outlined attack to police. The singers discussed their stalkers and their experience inside a trailer struck by gunfire. According to a police report, a woman has been charged with attempted murder. It was just after 1 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, and the pop star Rihanna was inside an Airstream trailer parked in the driveway of her Los Angeles home. Her partner, the rapper ASAP Rocky, was with her dozing in a bed. Suddenly she heard 10 loud sounds like something banging on metal. She would later recount to the police when the noises stopped. She opened the curtains and saw bullet holes in the trailer's windshield. Rihanna grabbed ASAP Rocky and pushed him to the ground. They shooting at us, she told him, according to court documents. That afternoon, March 8th, the police arrested a woman, Ivana Lizette Ortiz, who they say fired at least 20 rounds from an AR-15 style rifle into Rihanna's house and neighbors. The narrative of what the authorities say transpired that day unfolds in the Los Angeles Police Department's investigative report of the episode. Prosecutors later charged Ms. Ortiz, age 35, with several counts, including attempted murder. All three of Rihanna and ASAP Rocky's children, ages 3, 2, and 5 months, were at home at the time of the shooting. Rihanna's mother was also there, as were a nanny and a housekeeper. 2 people were inside the neighboring home. No injuries were reported. A representative for Rihanna did not respond to her request for comment. Ms. Ortiz, a speech therapist from Orlando, Florida, has a court hearing scheduled for Wednesday. The Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office has been appointed to Ms. Ortiz's case but has declined to comment on it. In their report, the police say that Ms. Ortiz was wearing a blonde wig when she was arrested. They say she invoked her Miranda rights at the police station but did make one comment to a pair of detectives. Can I say one sentence? They said she asked them. I would like to say that I wasn't attempting murder, but that's all I wanted to say. The police interviewed several witnesses to the shooting, including a chef for Rihanna, who had been parked outside the home on what was her first day of work. At one point, a Tesla pulled up alongside the chef's vehicle. The chef later told the police that the woman in it appeared to be smirking or smiling, as if she was about to do something naughty. The chef thought the encounter was strange but went back to watching TikTok videos on her phone, according to the report. Then she heard a series of loud pops and looked up to see the Tesla driving away. Smoke from the gunshots were coming out of one of the car's windows, she said. When Rihanna was interviewed by the police, she said she had times dealt with stalkers and death threats on social media, but could not think of a recent event that might be associated with the shooting. Rihanna told the authorities that after pushing ASAP Rocky to the ground, they both ran into the house and told everyone about the gunshots. The police identified bullet holes, the report says, in several places: the Airstream trailer, a pedestrian gate, a wooden fence, and the exterior wall of a nursery. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 13th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Claudia, and I thank you for listening.